What's up, everyone? It's Bones here. As we near the end of our Duelist Nexus support videos, we'll be revisiting Synchron. With the recent reveal of Stardust Wurm, the deck gains more versatility and potential variety to its arsenal. If you want to check out some combos with Stardust Trail, I'll leave that link down below, but before I start, if you're a fan of in-depth combo videos, new set coverage, and tuning in on different ideas that just might work, then summon the Crimson Dragon and toggle those like and subscribe buttons the way you would for Baron and Dispatter. Similar to my last video, I'll be doing the Cosmic Quasar combo first, and then I'll be doing combos for the build I chose so that you can see more of what the deck can do. And to start this first combo, we'll use the On Your Mark in order to net us a search for the Synchron carrier, then we can activate the tuning in order to get ourselves the Junk Synchron so that we have access into our speeder, and now we can use the carrier to get the extra normal, go into the Synchron, go into the speeder, use the speeder's effect which will be able to get us a few summons, as we'll then be able to bring out the Stardust, the Revolution, the Wheel, Assault, and the Jet, as we'll then be able to use the effect of the Stardust Synchron, get ourselves the Illumination, go into the Charge Warrior, as we'll then get a draw, as we'll then go into the Stardust Axel, and then use the Axel's effect in order to bring back the Jet Synchron. Similar to the Trail and Stardust Wurm combos, you'll usually be summoning the Jet Synchron off of the Stardust Axel, as we're now going to use the Illumination to bring out the new card, Stardust Wurm. This is a level 1 light dragon that reads if this card is in your hand or graveyard, and you control a level 8 or higher dragon synchro monster, you can special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can tribute this card, special summon up to 2 level 1 light dragon monsters from your hand and or graveyard, except Stardust Wurm, but they cannot activate their effects. You can only use each effect of Wurm once per turn, and I think that secondary effect where you summon out the level 1 light dragons would be more for a different geared deck rather than the stuff that we're seeing today, because you have to play the Mirage, or the Majestic, I'm sorry, and just a bunch of different other things. So in this video, I'll be primarily covering the first effect, which is similar to the Trail where you just get the extra extenders, except this one is somewhat easier to pull off since all you need is a level 8 or higher dragon synchro monster, and that's really easy to pull off as when it comes on the field, Axel is already on board. So now we're going to go into our Hyper Librarian, as we're then going to use the effect of the Stardust Synchron in our graveyard, tribute off the Wheel Synchron, use the effect of the Axel so that we can go into the Stardust, synchro away into our Crimson Dragon, use the effects of the Hyper Librarian to draw twice along with the Crimson Dragon for the search, get the Assault Synchron effect to get back the Axel so that we can also add our Scrap Iron Idol, get ourselves the summon of Axel, get our 2 draws. We'll then use the effect of the Wurm to special summon itself back since we control either the Crimson Dragon or the Axel, and then we'll go into our Shaman, as we'll use the effect of the Hyper Librarian to get the draw along with the Shaman for the special summon of the carrier. And I would like to point out, you technically have access into Naturia Beast like that, but we're going to go into the Garden Rose Maiden, as we're then going to use the effect of the Hyper Librarian to net ourselves the draw, go into the Cosmic Quasar Dragon, as we're then going to be able to use the effect of the Garden Rose to bring back the Stardust, and now we can use the effect of the Illumination to change the level of the Axel into level 9 so that we can use the effect of our Revolution Synchron, then go into the Baron so that we can use the Crimson Dragon, summon out the Dispatter off of it, and then we can use the Dispatter to bring out the Charge Warrior or the Stardust Synchron so that we can then go into our Crimson Dragon, so that on our opponent's turn, after we do set the Scrap Iron Idol, I would like to point out that I just didn't set it for this example replay, but in a real game you would set this on your board, as we'll then use the Crimson Dragon on our opponent's turn, bring out the Hot Red King Calamity, and that's what this first combo is meant to do. For this second combo, and now I'll be doing the more optimal line maybe, I don't want to emphasize too much on what's optimal and what's not because there's just so many versions of Synchrons right now, and it's going to take a lot of testing to really discover what's right and what's wrong. I'm just going the route that I feel is most natural to the deck, and that's kind of what I want to show. So we're going to normal summon the carrier, normal summon the Junk Synchron, go into our speeder, we'll then use the effect of speeder to get our summons of the Synchrons. You'll notice that for this one we're not playing the Wheel Synchron, and it's because it's just an extra body. You already can go into all the synchro plays you need without it, and it's a potential brick, but we're then going to go into our Charge Warrior. We'll use the effect of the charge to get ourselves the draw we'll then go into the Axel. Much like last time, you'll notice that a lot of these combos follow the same pattern. Same thing in our trail video, where the biggest difference is that you're summoning off the Stardust Wurm off of the Illumination, and then you just have different ways to extend your combos with a different level that you can synchro summon with. So we'll then be able to go into our Hyper Librarian, as we'll use the Stardust Wurm special summoning itself, then go into our Formula Synchron, or we'll go into the Shaman, as we'll use the effect of the Shaman along with the Hyper Librarian for the draw and special summon, as we'll then be able to use the effect of the Axel to go into our Stardust and synchro away into Baron, as we'll use the effect of the Hyper Librarian for the draws, use the effect of the Assault to revive the Axel, as we'll then be able to get our draws, go into our Axel Synchron, as we'll then use the effect of the Hyper Librarian, use the effect of the Revolution Synchron to revive it, we'll then use the Illumination to change the level of the Axel into level 9 or 7, it depends on what you want to go to, but we are going to go into our Dispatter, use the effect of the Hyper Librarian for that draw, use the effect of the Axel in order to change it to level 7, as we'll then be able to use the effect of the Dispatter to bring back the Stardust Wurm, and this will give us access into a level 8, as we're going to go into the Visas Amritara because the Stardust Wurm is actually a light monster, and this will give us access into a way to play around Dark Ruler no more, which is pretty big because as you've seen, these combos have played heavily into Nibiru, and though there are combos that play around it, there is one in my trail video as well that you can check out after this video, but this is a more efficient way to play around Dark Ruler, and the cool thing is that you can even continue by tributing off the Visas, then going into your Shenshen if you want the extra Floodgate, set the reframing, and end your turn on that. For this third combo, we'll get into the Junk Converter combos, and this will have a little bit more extension capabilities since we can use the effect of the Converter to revive a tuner, and we're then going to be able to use the Synchron, go into the Speeder, we'll then use the effect of the Converter as Chainlink 2 to bring back the Junk Synchron, and now we'll be able to get our 4 special summons from deck, as again, we're not playing the Wheel Synchron. And to continue, we'll then use our effect of the Stardust, and then we'll get ourselves the Illumination, as we'll go into our Charge Warrior, much like previously, use the effect for the draw, go into our Axel, use the effect of the Axel to get back the Jet Synchron. Another thing I would like to point out is that there are combos with the Supernova Dragon that you can also do, but I'm just not doing them because I feel like with the new support, being able to max out on all the draws that we can get feels like a better thing to do in my opinion. But we're then going to go into the Hyper Librarian, use the effect of the Wurm, and you'll notice the trend of going into the Axel and then the Hyper Librarian, just so that you can max out on all of the draws that you get, but then we'll be able to bring back the Converter as we're then going to get the draw, use the effect of the Axel so that we can go into our Baron, and now we're going to be able to get another draw as we'll be able to get the effect of the Assault for the Axel, and we'll net ourselves the 2 draws off of the Hyper Librarian, as we do get the 2 off of the Stardust Axel and the Stardust Dragon that do go into the Baron, and then we'll be able to use the effect of the Illumination to change the level of the Axel, so we can go into the Crimson Dragon, use the effect of Hyper Librarian, use the effect to search and the effect to toggle with the Crimson Dragon, as we'll be able to net ourselves the search for the Scrap Iron Idol along with the Dispatter, as we'll then be able to get the draws off of Hyper Librarian, and now we'll go into our Axel, as we'll be able to use the effect of Hyper Librarian again, use the Axel in order to send the Assault, as we'll change the level to 7, use the effect of Dispatter to bring back the Stardust Wurm. Now we can go into Amritara. The Amritara will net us a search for the reframing, as the Hyper Librarian will get us yet another draw. Then we'll use the effect of the Revolution Synchron to bring that back, go into the Triage Master, not use its effect, which is important so that you don't pop anything. We're then going to use the Stardust Synchron, tributing the Amritara if you want to, so that you can get into another Synchro 10 this way, and then you can set your reframing, you can set your Scrap Iron Idol, and just end your turn on that. For this next combo, we have the Junk Converter with Ash again, and this is just a different approach that you can take with it, as we'll be able to get ourselves the Junk Synchron, normal summon the Junk Synchron to get back the Converter, and now we can go into our Junk Speeder, as we'll be able to use the effect of the Junk Speeder and the Converter to bring back the Junk Synchron, and we'll get ourselves our 4 bodies now, as the Stardust Synchron will be able to notice the search for the illumination, and now we can get ourselves the illumination as we go into our charge warrior again, use its effect to draw as we'll go into our Axel, use the Axel in order to bring back the jet, activate the illumination so we can get back the Stardust Wurm, then we'll be able to go into our Hyper Librarian, use the effect of Wurm to bring it back, then we'll go into our Shaman as we'll be able to use the effect of our Hyper Librarian and the Shaman, and that's just another nice thing if you've been noticing throughout the video, the way that Stardust Wurm can just go to the graveyard and then magically just revive itself back because you control the Axel is just so good, but we'll be able to get ourselves the effect of the Stardust Axel so that we can go into our Stardust Dragon and immediately synchro away into Baron, use the effect of the Hyper Librarian to get our draws, use the effect of the Assault for the Axel, as we'll then be able to get our draws here, use the effect of the Illumination, changing the effect of the Stardust Axel as we'll then go into our Crimson. We'll then use the effect of the Crimson along with the Hyper Librarian as we'll then toggle out with the Crimson Dragon to go into our Dispatter. And now we can get ourselves the add of the Scrap Iron Idol as we'll get ourselves another draw. Then we can synchro away into a level 5 as we'll go into the Axel, use the effect of the Hyper Librarian along with the effect of the Dispatter, get that special summon for the Stardust Wurm, use the effect of the Axel as we'll then be able to get ourselves the Emritara access, and now we can get ourselves another draw along with the search as we'll be able to continue our turn by using the effect of the Revolution Synchron. We'll then go into our Penguin Brave, and this is like the really spicy one because in this particular build, if you're going to play something like this, you're not going to play the Scrap Iron Idol, I would like to point out. It only takes one extra brick to play, which I'll show what it is right now as we're going to use its effect in order to get our Penguin Soldier. So if you want to play this version of the deck, all you have to do is take out the Scrap Iron Idol for the Penguin Soldier, and then you do have the reframing that you can still set to protect your board, keeping the Visas Amritara on board, unless you want to tribute it with the Stardust Synchron, which I believe is still an option in our graveyard. Indeed it is, but this particular combo, since we have the Brave and the set card, we really don't want to do that. Now on to the next combo, and this will be the last Junk Converter combo, I believe, with the 100 Apple Dragon, and we'll start this one by using the effect of the Converter to get ourselves the Junk Synchron, use the Junk Synchron to get back the Junk Converter, then we can go into our Speeder as we'll use the Speeder 1 and the Junk Converter 2 as we'll bring back the 100 Apple, and then we can get ourselves our Fortuners as we'll use the effect of the Stardust Synchron and then use the Stardust Synchron to get the Illumination, and now we can use the Synchron and the Speeder to go into the Charge Warrior as we'll then be able to get our draw along with the ability to go into the Axel, bring back the Jet as usual as we'll use the Illumination to bring out the Stardust Wurm. Now we can go into our Hyper Librarian, use the effect of Wurm to get itself back, then we'll be able to go into our Shaman, use the effect of Hyper Librarian to draw, Shaman can get back the Converter, we'll then be able to use the effect of the Axel to go into our Charge Warrior, or to go into our Stardust Dragon so that we can go into our Baron, use the effects of the Hyper Librarian and the Assault so that we can get our draws along with the effect of the Assault so that we can get back our Axel, as we'll then be able to use the Illumination, changing the level of the Axel so that we can go into our Crimson Dragon, get our draws. We'll also be able to get the Search and the Toggle off of the Crimson Dragon, so we'll get our Scrap Iron Idol. You can get any of the other new ones, I just am using the Scrap Iron Idol in this particular video because it's the version that I'm running. If you want to see more combos with the other Crimson Dragon spells, you can just go to the previous video which covers the other new cards more extensively. So we'll then be able to use the effect of the Dispatter to bring back the Stardust Wurm, as we'll then be able to go into our Metal Marcher. We'll then use the effects of the Metal Marcher and the Hyper Librarian, bring back the Revolution Synchron, and this will give us the ability to go into our Axel Synchron, get another draw, use the effect of the 100 Apple so that we have the ability to use the effect of the Axel before we go into our Herald, as we'll now go into our Herald, use the effect for the draw, then go into our Omega, as we can then use the effect of the Revolution Dragon if you would like to, or the Revolution Synchron, use the effect of the Stardust Synchron, and we'll be able to go into the Amritara. If you don't want to keep the Herald, you can even search yourself Saravis like this, but we'll then be able to get ourselves the Scrap Iron Idol along with the reframing, and this will wrap up our end board. Now for this next combo, I do want to do just one combo with the Wurm and Trail, as we're going to have the Speeder access, use the effect of On Your Mark to get the Carrier, activate Tuning, we'll then be able to get get our speeder access, which is still really what this deck is, and you want to be able to resolve speeder as much as possible. So that is important to note, as we're going to special summon our 4 Synchrons. We'll then be able to get ourselves the search for the illumination. We'll go into our charge warrior, get the draw, as we'll then be able to go into our Axel. Axel can revive the Jet Synchron. Now we can use our illumination to bring out our Stardust Wurm. And this is really cool because we have 2 forms of extenders here with the Wurm and the Trail, as we're now going to be able to go into our Shaman, use the effect of the Hyper Librarian along with the Shaman so that we can bring back the carrier and get that draw, so that we can use the effect of the Axel, go into our Stardust, then go into our Baron, use the effect draw of the Hyper Librarian and the effect to revive of the Assault, and we'll also be able to trigger the Trail in hand to special summon it, as we're then going to revive the Axel, get our draws. From here we can then use the effect of the Stardust Synchron to revive itself, tributing the carrier, go into our Crimson Dragon, use the effect of the Hyper Librarian and the Crimson Dragon to search. Crimson Dragon, quick effect, toggle, go into our Dispatter, get ourselves the Scrap Iron Idol, get another draw, as we'll be able to get yet another draw off of the Dispatter, bring back the Jet Synchron, and now we'll have access into another level 5 as we're going to go into the Axel, get another draw, use the effect of the Trail to get the token. Now we can use our effect of the Axel to get our Send before we do anything else, as we're then going to be able to go into the Amritara this way as well. And I said that because you could technically also go for the Herald of the Arclight, so you do want to send with the Axel first always, as we're now going to get a draw along with a search as we get ourselves the reframing. And now we can synchro away into the Omega as we can set our reframing and the Scrap Iron Idol, and we'll be able to end our turn on this. Now I want to get into the adventure combos. The deck has at least a couple of them, because Stardust Wurm or Stardust Trail, it doesn't matter. You can still combo with either one. The only thing that changes is what you're summoning off of Illumination. And we're going to be able to normal summon the Revolution, as we'll get ourselves the effect of the Fateful Adventure. We'll get ourselves the Draco back, use the effect of the Fateful to get ourselves the Griffin. And you'll see that I am on the Griffin instead of the Illegal Knight as shown in the previous one. And over some thought, considered that the Griffin may be better just for the hands where you only draw Adventure and maybe going second cards. The Griffin at least gives you a negate. So we'll then be able to use the effect of the Draco back along with the Griffin, get our body and our equip on board, go into our Baron, use the effect of Revolution Synchron, get it back, as we'll be able to go into our Speeder protected by the Baron, use the effect of the Speeder to get ourselves the 4 Synchrons from deck, as we're going to use the Stardust Synchron to get ourselves the Illumination. Now we can go into our Charge Warrior, get ourselves the draw, and then we can go into our Axel. Everything is still protected, which is really cool, as we can bring back the Jet Synchron, use the effect of the Illumination for the Stardust Wurm, as we'll then be able to go into our Hyper Librarian, use the effect of the Wurm to bring itself back so that we can go into our Formula Synchron. And the big difference here also is that in the Adventure version, you do want to play Formula Synchron over the Shaman, because since you're playing less the Synchron carriers and no junk converters because of the Adventure engine, you won't really have too many targets for Shaman that much of the time. So we'll be able to get ourselves the 2 draws off of the Formula and the Hyper Librarian, use the effect of the Stardust Synchron to revive itself, tributing the Evolution Synchron as we tribute the Axel for its effect, go into our Stardust Dragon, then we can go into our Crimson Dragon. We'll use the effect of the Hyper Librarian along with the Crimson Dragon and the Assault, as we'll revive the Axel, get ourselves the Search, and we can also toggle as Chainlink 5, get ourselves the Dispatter, as we'll be able to get the Search for the Scrap Iron Idol, revive the Axel, get ourselves the 2 draws, and now we can use the effect as we summon the Dispatter for the extra draw, as we'll then be able to use the Dispatter for the extra summon of the Stardust Wurm, as now we can go into our Marchers. Now we can use the effect of our Stardust Illumination in the graveyard, change the level of the Stardust cell so that we can go into our Crimson Dragon, use the Hyper Librarian, we can then go into our Omega, and the cool thing is that as we set our card and pitch a couple, or really not, depending on what your hand is, we'll then go onto our opponent's turn where we can target the Omega with the Crimson Dragon to go into our Crystal Wing. We're going to start this one by activating the Fateful, then we can activate the Assault Synchron from hand so that we can get that search off of the Fateful and not use our normal summon, as we'll get ourselves the Draco back to hand, use the effect of the Fateful to get ourselves the Water Enchantress, and now we have access into Speeder with a level 3 and a 2 Synchron. That's a tuner. We'll go into the Speeder. This will give us the 4 special summons from deck, and you really don't want to play the Wheel Synchron here because of the Adventure Bricks. That is something really important to note, and another reason why I don't think that in this version in particular, you really wouldn't want to play the Trail and the Wurm in the same deck. So we're now going to add ourselves the Illumination, go into our Charge Warrior, activate the Charge Warrior for the draw, go into the Axel, use the effect of the Axel to revive the Jet Synchron, activate the Illumination to get ourselves the Wurm. From here, we can now go into our Hyper Librarian, use the effect of the Wurm to revive itself. We'll then go into the Formula Synchron. We'll then use the effect of the Formula and the Hyper Librarian to get our draws, as we'll use the effect of the Stardust Synchron to revive itself, tributing the Revolution. Use the effect of the Stardust Axel to go into the Stardust and then go into our Crimson Dragon. Now we can use the effect of the Hyper Librarian along with the Assault to revive our Axel and the Crimson Dragon to get ourselves an add, as we'll also be able to toggle later in the turn, as we're going to get ourselves the access into Baron, use the effect of the Hyper Librarian for the draw, use the effect of the Crimson Dragon to go into our Dispatter. We can use the effect to get another draw, as we'll be able to use the Water Enchantress now, and this is just another really cool thing. We haven't used any normal summon effects, so we can just revive our Revolution Synchron off of its effect, activate our Rite of Aramesir, we'll be able to get a level 4 token, which happens to be Earth, and now we can go into Naturia Beast, and we'll be able to get another draw off of the Hyper Librarian, use the effect of the Dispatter to get back our Stardust Synchron. Now, you can either go into a Synchro 9, a Synchro 10, it depends. You can also go into a Synchro 8 with the Illumination, since you'll be able to decrease or increase your level by 1, and we'll be able to go into our Crystal Wing like this as we set our Scrap Iron Idol and end our turn on this. So we have Jet Synchron along with the Right. We'll start this one by activating Right, get ourselves the token along with the Fateful on board, normal summon the Jet. The Jet normal summon will allow us to get the Draco back to hand via the Fateful, and now we can use the Fateful in order to net ourselves the search for the Griffin Rider, pitch the Draco back, equip it to the token, as we'll be able to special summon the Wandering Griffin Rider, and then we'll go into our Axel, as we'll use its effect to bring back the Jet. Now we can use the effect of the Axel, go into our Stardust so that we can quick synchro into our Junk Speeder and have it under protection via the Axel effect. We'll get ourselves the 4 tuners, as we're going to get the Stardust, the Revolution, Assault, and Jet. Use the effect of the Stardust Synchron to get ourselves Illumination. Go into Charge Warrior for the draw, as we'll then be able to activate the Illumination to get the special summon of the Stardust Wurm. Then we can go into our Hyper Librarian, use the effect of the Wurm to bring it back, as we're then going to go and use our Stardust Synchron to revive itself, tributing off the Revolution Synchron. Then we'll go into our Omega, as we can now use the effect of the Hyper Librarian for the draw, go into our Crimson Dragon, as now we can use the effect of the Hyper Librarian and the Crimson Dragon for the toggle and the search. As we're then going to go into our Crystal Wing, we can then add ourselves the Fake Iron Idol, and then we can add ourselves the Hyper Librarian draws, as we'll be able to use the Revolution Synchron to revive itself, use the effect of the Stardust Illumination to change the level of the Stardust Wurm, as we'll then be able to go into our Metal Marcher, use the effect of the Hyper Librarian and the Marcher for the revival and the draw, as we bring back the Assault Synchron, and then we're going to go into our Baron. We can then get ourselves the extra draw, as we'll use the effect of Omega, putting it back so that we can go into our Omega, our Scrap Iron Idol, and we can end our turn on that. With all of the combos out of the way, we can finally get onto the deck profiles, and you'll notice that there's not a lot different that I happen to change compared to the previous lists. Just the fact that instead of the Trail, you're really just playing the Wurm. We're not playing the Wheel anymore. There's other things like the Nap Beast that you can play that you don't really have to. There's just other options you can insert depending on playstyle, depending on the format, just a bunch of different other things. There's also this stuff which can easily be changed depending on the circumstance as well. Outside of that, for the adventure version of the deck, what you really want to focus on is being able to see your Synchrons along with the right package, because as you saw, that just happens to be combo, and being able to play so few Garnets out of it compared to the 6 searchers that you have, your Water Enchantress and Foolish being access into your 3 copies of Right, actually very easy to get into your Synchrons compared to it is to draw a brick, even if you are technically playing a total of about 4 of them maybe, because I don't really consider the Wurm brick. If you're able to special summon it out from your hand, then you also have the Carrier, which also kind of isn't a brick. It can just get you into Speeder. There's even things like the Illumination that can just help you through Nibiru as well. I feel like when you have your bricks in this deck, it's really just when you're seeing you're going second cards and maybe some tuners. That is one downside the deck does have, outside of it just relying on Speeder as well. But that's another thing about the Adventure list, where the Adventure list has more ways to protect the Speeder than the non-Adventure list. Before I take you on to the Pure list, I'll just do the card by card, and we have the 1 Wurm, we have the 3 Stardust Synchron, the 1 Illumination, the 2 Jet Synchron, the 2 Assault Synchron, the 2 Revolution Synchron, the 1 Synchron Carrier, Scrap Iron Idol, the 3 Tunings, the 3 Ready Set, the 1 Griffin, the 1 Fateful, Dracoback, Foolish, 2 Water Enchantress, 3 Rights, 3 Ash Blossom, 3 Bells, the 1 Druis Wurm and 2 Magna Huts, the 1 Thrust and 2 Talents. To the extra deck, we have the Formula Synchron, Metal Marcher, Herald, Hyper Librarian, Naturia Beast, Axel, Junk Speeder, Warrior, Stardust, Axel, Mega, Crystal Wing, Baron, Dispatter, Crimson Dragon to round out this deck profile. The second version of the list, and again, it's a lot of the same thing. You'll notice that there is only 1 Revolution Synchron in this version, and it's because in the Pure version, Revolution Synchron really just does a lot of what Junk Synchron does, so it's better to see Junk Synchron. We don't have any level 4s, 5s in this particular deck that you can synchro away from hand with, and the revival effect is something that you can even get off of sending it through the Axel Synchron, so that is important to note. Also notice that this version has the extra brick with the reframing, and I wouldn't suggest playing this in the Adventure build either, just because you're already playing some amount of bricks. If you want to go over 40 and play it, that is an option that you have. Outside of that, I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory, where you have your Synchron tuners, you have the Carrier for the Ready Set, you also have your Junk Converters in order to get your combo going, the 100 Apple for your Small World. It has some cool combos with the Stardust Wurm because of their levels, especially when you bring out the token, happens to be a level 2. You can treat as a tuner to go into your Metal Marcher, so just little things like that. More importantly, the big difference in this list compared to the other one is how the Small World along with the tunings and the Ready Set really are what make your deck go. Because we don't have something like the Rite of Aramesir and stuff like that, drawing into your Synchron stuff and your going second stuff can be a little bit harder to come back from, especially if your opponent manages to set up a board. Overall, the variety of Synchron decks and what you can do, always give your opponent a pause on when to stop you, because possible things that can be in your hand. So that's also really important to note when playing this deck, until we get a list that potentially maybe limits tuning or even bans it, depending on what happens, because I don't know what's going to happen with the upcoming list and all this new Synchron support. Knowing that Revolution Synchron and Assault Synchron are at 3 along with tuning, you have to have some pause for that. With all of that said, I'll get onto the card by card, and we have the 3 Stardust Synchron, the 3 Junk Synchron, the 2 Assault Synchron, the 1 Carrier, Revolution Synchron, Jet, Assault or Reinforcement of the Army, Framing, Scrap Iron Idol, Just Illumination, Wurm, 3 Converter, 100 Apple, 2 Small World, 3 Tuning, Ready Set, 1 Thrust, 1 Druis Wurm, 2 Talons, 2 Magna Hut, 3 Ghost Belt, and 3 Ash, which again, all of this stuff is interchangeable. Onto the extra deck, we have the Shaman, Metal Marcher, Herald of the Arclight, Hyper Librarian, Spell Synchron, Junk Speeder, Warrior, Emritara, Stardust Dragon, Axel, Omega, Shenshen, Baron, Dispatter, and Crimson Dragon to wrap up the deck profile. Before I wrap up the video, I would like to go over one last card, Duelist Genesis, and it reads, if you have a tuner on your field or in your graveyard, add one Synchro spell trap from your deck to your hand. You can only activate one Duelist Genesis per turn. And while it's kind of a cute effect, the only reason I don't think it's worth playing right now is because the only Stardust spell that you really want to play at the moment is the Illumination, which happens to be searchable off the Synchron that you're summoning off of Junk Speeder in Junk Speeder Turbo.deck. That's why I really didn't go over it in today's video. All of that said, everyone who's made it this far, I'd like to thank you for watching and for the 500 plus subs. I truly appreciate your support, and now that we've monetized the channel, giving us access to supers and memberships means that more awesome stuff is on the horizon. To get the channel membership, just click on the description below, and there will be a link that takes you there. You'll also notice a free Discord link that I've made for us too. If you want to support me as a content creator, even if you can't donate supers or get a membership for the channel, clicking on those thumbs up and subscribe buttons would help a lot too. For those wondering, I do plan on making updates to the channel as the support on the channel grows, but anyways, I hope to see you on the next one. It's Bones, signing out.